I'm looking for it to be on air. Hello and welcome everyone to part 2 of the Young Survival Coalition's Shady Pink Elephant End of Life series. Tonight we have our featured speakers Michael Hebb and Angel Grant.
Hello everyone.
Hi.
We're thrilled to be here.
So a few housekeeping rules before we get started. One is, if you are a study participant, as you know, you are required to be a part of all 3 parts of the series and take the post-test after each one. The links for all of that will be at the end of this presentation, and we will remind you, so please don't worry if you don't catch all that information right now. This study is a part of a collaboration with the University of Louisville, and we're really excited to have a study going on and to have everyone who is participating in the study and everyone who is here tonight, whether they're in the study or not. Michael Hebb has been described by the New York Times as an underground restaurateur, impresario, and provocateur. He is an innovative and influential cultural figure and activist. Michael believes that the dinner table is one of the most effective yet overlooked vehicles for changing the world, and he aims to utilize that setting for thoughtful discussion on universal topics, including rituals, history, culture, and end of life. Angel is the co-founder of drugsoverdinner.org and the executive director of the deathoverdinner.org movement. She has traveled the globe for over a decade teaching yoga practices and sharing talks on how to reduce the many ways we all suffer. There's a lot more information about the both of them. We're happy to share that, but we really want to make the most of the time tonight. So without further ado, here are Michael and Angel.
Thank you, Jean. So this is Michael talking, and I'm going to start off the webinar this evening and give you a little background. Starting with some background as to why we decided to combine 2 very unlikely bedfellows, death and dinner. And I'm going to start with giving a sense of my work over the last 20 years and what I've learned. I've been focusing on the dinner table and how it's powerfully connected to our evolution as humans. And along the way I learned a few things. And here, actually, I'm going to give you a little sneak peek into a dinner that was the first death dinner that we ever put together. But now we're going to jump back to a very much earlier dinner. And this is something that isn't talked about very often, but we became human at the dinner table. And what I mean by that is when we started cooking over fire, we concentrated calories for the first time, and this is where we as humans made the evolutionary leap from ape to human. When we were apes, we had very large bellies and small brains. I'm going to share a graph of this, actually. And when we started cooking over fire, we concentrated calories, and all of a sudden these big bellies, an ape chews 7 hours a day, just to give you some understanding. Humans chew for only 24 minutes a day. So when we started cooking, this big belly actually got transported or exported to the fire, and with all of this extra energy, and it went to our brains. So our brains got very large, and this is where we started language. This is where poetry came from. So many things actually came from this moment and from cooking. So I realized that there's this inextricable link between our evolution and cooking and eating together and the dinner table. Came further to understand, and here's a beautiful quote that actually captures that by Richard Wrangham, and that's, "I believe the transformative moment that gave rise to the Homo sapien, one of the great transitions in the history of life, stemmed from the control of fire and the advent of cooked meals." And he's the professor professor of biological anthropology at Harvard and actually runs that department. So as I continued my studies and cooking for people all over the world, I came to understand that the dinner table was also a very important part of these wonderful people that we're looking at. And Virginia Woolf and Picasso and Einstein, Warhol, Gertrude Stein, Gahil Gibran, Benjamin Franklin, all formed or were essential parts of convivial clans that gathered around the dinner table and shared ideas. The discovery of oxygen, DNA, radar, cubism, all of these ideas that are essential to modern culture were actually fueled by the fire, and many of them were actually fueled by the fire and by the dinner table, and many of them were actually born at those dinners. Going back a little bit further, there's the classic example of Plato and Socrates and how they used the table to change culture. The Greek symposiums were these remarkable gatherings that brought together all of the leaders in Athens, and that was craftsmen, politicians, playwrights, and from those dinners we actually got democracy. This is where those ideas were formed and how they were first broadcast. So the table's powerful, and as you can see, it's been used throughout time from our very beginnings as humans all the way up to the modern era as a place where we take leaps forward in the way that we're thinking about very important issues. And about this time, about 3 years ago, when Angel and I started working together, we came across a harrowing statistic, something that would change our lives forever. And that's that 75% of Americans want to die at home, and only 25% of us actually do. So if we put that into perspective and think about the fact that America, a country that prides itself on individual choice, prides itself on freedom, that half of America is not getting what it wants at the end of life, arguably one of the most important decisions that we'll make. And so we've dug a little bit deeper and discovered that 43% of Medicare recipients spend more than their total assets out of pocket on end-of-life care. So the sheer fact that we're not getting what we want at this final moment of our lives, and we're also bankrupting ourselves and our loved ones while we're doing it, made both Angel and I stop, and then we started working on this idea of let's have dinner and talk about death, realizing that the changes that need to happen in our healthcare space weren't necessarily going to come from doctors or insurance companies, people that were stymied by issues of fiduciary responsibility or scared of words like death panels, but that in fact change was going to have to come from patients. It was have to come from people like you and me, and that now that we've discovered that the dinner table is this place that can actually hold very important conversations, it can hold very weighty topics and can create extraordinary change. We decided that we were going to put these two things together, death and dinner, and we were going to use another thing, technology. We were going to build a beautiful website that inspired people to gather their loved ones, families and friends, and to talk about this issue, to talk about the fact that we are all mortal and that being prepared for it can have some very profound effects on our lives. And we realized that if we made it beautiful, if we made it inviting, if we made it look like something that maybe even your grandmother or a grandmother, let's say, in Omaha might pick up, or maybe even a hipster in Brooklyn might like the aesthetic of, that it could invite people in and they could gather friends and give these topics the place and the care that they deserve, and start a patient-led revolution at the table. Get everyone talking about how being prepared and how facing mortality could actually be a gift, not something just to fear. And we added a little bit of humor here and there. Anyone who has completed a death dinner gets to share this kind of token, this badge that they've survived a death dinner. And so all of this came together. We launched 2.5 years ago, and we hoped it reached about 1,000 families, and we kind of dreamed about the fact that maybe we could have some impact on the national conversation about end of life. What we found is in the last 2 years, over 100,000 people have had death dinners, and it has been covered by every major publication in the country, and right now we are working on building an Australian version and actually a Jewish edition. But we're working with the Australian government to build Death Over Dinner in Australia with major backing from government leaders. What we've also found is that this simple dinner and the type of questions that we crafted with our advisors, leaders in the end-of-life space, could open up conversation of family and actually transform the way that a family was thinking about end of life. And that can affect a family in so many ways, as we saw, not just financially, but emotionally being prepared. And that's the background of what we've produced in the last couple of years. I'm going to turn it over to Angel Grant to talk about the deeper side of the work that Death Over Dinner. I wanted to give you a background of what why we came to this and what we built, and this is a little bit more how it functions.
Hello. So I invite you to jot some stuff down as we go along if it resonates with you, but I just want to give you this opportunity, perhaps you can do it on your computer, but to set yourself up to take a few notes if that is not available to you right now. About 2 hours ago, I decided, it wasn't like a mental decision, I felt compelled or called to change the direction completely of what I was going to talk about. And still the same topic, of course, but a whole different path that felt more real and with more heart. And so I have this one slide, so forgive that, and but we'll go through it all. So what I want to talk about is how to have these challenging conversations, and not that there's just one way, of course, but sharing a way to have these challenging conversations. So first, I'll talk about our site, and that's very briefly. And so the overview of deathoverdinner.org, if you haven't been on, is it's very user-friendly, and you just go on, and the first question is, who do you want to invite to dinner? So just thinking about who you want to have around the table to have these conversations that a lot of people find challenging. Who do you want to hear, and who do you want to hear you? And then the second, once there are bubbles on there, and so if you can choose whoever, it's like bubble in whoever you want to invite to dinner. And then the second step asks what your intention is for having the dinner. Why do you want to have this conversation? And again, you have choices, it's multiple choice to choose from. And then after that, then you are presented with a screen that has a library of content, and there's just a list of choices for everyone to either read, watch, or listen to before the dinner. So basically, you're assigning homework to your dinner guests, and they're all of the content's only between 5 and 20 minutes on the long end. But this sets you up with a shared experience that you can build from or reference during the dinner. So now I want to talk a little deeper about what is being called inside us, what wants to happen inside us, inside you, before you have one of these conversations, or before you invite people to engage with you in these conversations. And so as I start to talk, I also invite you to stay curious during these next 10 or so minutes. So instead of doing what our brain kind of naturally does, which is sift through what we hear and placing it in the boxes of, yes, this applies to me, or no, this doesn't apply to me, instead I invite you to wonder how it all applies to you. And perhaps it's only a small percent, some of it. But when we wonder in that way, it gives us this spaciousness to grow instead of just shutting down, oh no, I got that one, you know. So I invite you to stay in a sense of wonder. So I've listed 5 steps here about how to have these challenging conversations. And the first step is desire. So every action begins with desire. But a lot of times we either skip right over that or don't acknowledge it. But what I am suggesting is that you really get in touch with your desire to be heard on this topic, and your desire to be heard from, you know, to be heard by whom? Who do you want to hear you? Is it your husband, your mom, your dad, your kids? Like, who are you wanting to really see and hear you? And then the second step, well, before I go there, to really own that desire, to not think in any way that any of our desires are bad. I heard a quote a long time ago, and I can't remember which teacher said it now, but the quote is that all desires are sacred. Now, that doesn't mean in the bigger sense that all of our desires need to be acted out, but all of our desires are a gateway to learning something, to realizing something, to opening in some way. And so first, acknowledging your desire to be heard and your desire to bring your loved ones around and hear them. Second is intention. So it's not enough just to have the desire. Creating a conscious intention to act on it and allow it, creating that conscious intention allows it to come into reality. So really stating out loud to God or the universe or to your own heart, but stating it, writing it down, your intention that you want to have this conversation, that you want to be heard, it's okay to be heard, to want other people to hear you, that you want to hear your loved ones, you want to hear what they're experiencing. And so the third step is action. Now, I really, really want you to hear me in this next sentence. Speaking up is an act of self-care. So before an action, or the action to having these dinners, to having these conversations, when you speak it out loud, you are honoring yourself. Speaking up is an act of self-care. When we don't speak up, it's often because we're afraid of being a burden to others, or of being, quote unquote, too much, or because we're afraid of making other people uncomfortable. Anytime we fear making others uncomfortable, we are actually afraid of what we will have to feel. Because it doesn't feel good to witness someone else not feel comfortable, not in my experience anyway. And especially when it's someone close to me, someone that I've been engaging with for years in a certain way. And what I've found over years is that we often have unconscious, unspoken agreements with those closest to us. This isn't something that we realized when the agreements were happening. It's not something we might not realize it now, probably don't. But what I mean, for example, is an agreement like, I will hold my fears and pain inside because they make you uncomfortable, and you will do the same for me. But the lack of speaking the truth inside us as it arises, things that aren't working for us in any of our close relationships, and whether times are really hard and we're struggling with our health, or whether times seem like everything's rolling right along, but the lack of speaking that truth inside us as it arises is especially common for women. Our culture hasn't rewarded it. It hasn't rewarded women speaking their truth as it arises, speaking what is not working for us as it arises. And so I want to share a few research studies, a few lines from several different research studies. And the first one is, a team of researchers at Stanford found that women who repressed their emotions were more likely to show disruptions in the normal balance of the stress hormone cortisol compared to women who didn't repress their emotions. I'm going to say that one more time. A team of researchers at Stanford found that women who repress their emotions are more likely to show disruptions in the normal balance of the stress hormone cortisol compared to women who didn't repress their emotions. Earlier studies had already shown that unbalanced cortisol fluctuations can predict early death in women with breast cancer that has spread to other parts of the body. The second study, a UCLA study, found that people who have repressive styles tend to be more prone to illness, particularly immune system-related diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis, infections, and cancers. The concept is of unexpressed anger. If one doesn't let it out, that could have adverse consequences. The third one comes from the Journal of Psychosomatic Research, and it says, extreme suppression of anger was the most commonly identified characteristic of 160 breast cancer patients who were given a detailed psychological interview and self-administered questionnaire. Repressing anger magnified exposure to physiological stress, thereby increasing the risk of cancer. And then the second to last one is from the Cancer Nursing International Journal, and they reported that extremely low anger scores have been noted in numerous studies of patients with cancer. Such low scores suggest suppression, repression, or restraint of anger. There is evidence to show that suppressed anger can be a precursor to the development of cancer and also a factor in its progression after diagnosis. And last, this one is from the Journal of the American Medical Association. A study comparing long-term survivors of breast cancer with those who did not survive. Scientists at Johns Hopkins University found that long-term survivors expressed much higher levels of anxiety, hostility, and other negative emotions. They expressed them. Patients who were able to express their feelings lived longer than those who had difficulty in doing so. So, it's almost bringing tears to my eyes right now, and I've been reading them for quite a while now, but collectively, it appears to me that we are afraid to speak our truth, and it might be killing us, literally. Now, before I go any further, I want to address one more disruption to healing, and that is believing that pain or illness is in any way punishment. I work with women all the time to get down to the bottom of unconscious belief systems that are limiting their lives and health. And the thing that repeatedly shows up in one form or another is this belief that's often hidden from their consciousness. We have to uncover it. But it so often comes down to something like, if I weren't bad, I wouldn't be in pain. If I weren't bad, I wouldn't be suffering. This is toxic. So, to sum this number 3 up, we speak as an act of self-care. And we start to notice anytime we blame ourselves for experiencing pain or for experiencing illness. A voice that buys into blame is a voice that blocks healing and wholeness. So, step 4, coming back to how to have the dinner, how to have the conversation around the dinner table, how to have the challenging conversation. Step 4 is awareness of attachment to outcome. So a lot of the philosophies that I practice and study and teach say detach from the outcome, detach from any outcomes. But before we can honestly get to that point, we have to be aware or acknowledge that we do wish for a certain outcome, and that is very human and natural. It's okay to wish for the people that you love to be able to hear you and support you deeply and hear your fears and hear all of it. It's okay to want that. Part B here is, though, to feel your desire to be heard and deeply supported while knowing that everybody deals with fear and pain according to their own wounds and life experiences. And so how your loved ones deal with the conversation and how they deal with you expressing your fears and your pain has absolutely nothing to do with you. It is a result of their whole lifetime of conditioning based on the pain and the wounds that they have experienced. But this leads me to the final step, step 5. In step 5, you'll notice that I repeated part of step 3. So, willingness to speak as an act of self-care. That's repeated because it is so important. If it's the only thing you take away from any of these words I said, I hope it's that. So willingness to speak as an act of self-care. So the last thing, 4, we talked about awareness of attachment to outcomes. So say that you are aware that you have this desire, that if you have this conversation with your loved ones, you bring them around the table, you talk about mortality, you talk about what we're all facing, you talk about your personal fears, your personal experiences, your personal pain, and you talk about it really openly and vulnerably and show your heart. Of course you wish and hope that they hear you and support you and share from their open hearts. But if they don't, and if by chance someone says something that hurts you, that hurts your feelings, or they don't say anything and that hurts your feelings, then willingness to speak as an act of self-care still applies, to build and maintain this open flow of communication, to acknowledge it hurts, the silence hurts me. I feel hurt when I don't feel heard when there's just silence or when there's this certain response. And part B of number 5 is to listen to more than what people are verbalizing. So this relates back to that we all express our fears and our pain differently. And for those people who do have more silence or who block the emotion or mask it, when we're paying attention and when we're really open to hearing them, then we can take in more than what they're just saying or not saying. So the tricky thing that most people don't realize is that running from pain or building walls to armor ourselves against pain inevitably creates more pain. So when people that you love are doing that during a conversation, I encourage you to listen for the wounds underneath the words or the silence, but not to take them on because they have nothing to do with you. So, wrapping up this part, I invite you to start with the desire to be heard and to listen. I invite you to speak as an act of self-care. And I invite you to use death over dinner as your toolkit. It can end up being a more powerful healer than you imagine. And so, last, before I turn it back over, I would love to guide us in a short relaxation/meditation practice in just 2 or 3 minutes. So, just get comfortable wherever you're sitting. You don't have to be in any meditation posture. You don't have to have ever meditated before in your whole life. This is just a way to practice relaxing and listening to more than your thoughts. So get comfortable. Make sure that your collarbone space and your shoulders, your heart space, the whole center of your chest is able to be open, that your spine is long, but all of the muscles around your spine are relaxed. And then close your eyes. Relax through your hips. Relax your shoulders, your elbows, your wrists, and the centers of your palms. Imagine them relaxing. Now take a nice deep breath. And then maybe take another one. And on your second one, on the exhale, let your jaw relax. And let your cheekbones relax. And now as you keep a steady rhythm of breath, just letting your inhales get deeper and your exhales get a little longer, relax your eyes behind your eyelids. Now imagine each of the tiny, tiny muscles on your scalp. Each of them are just relaxing. And then start to breathe in, imagining breath moving up your spine from the tailbone all the way to the crown of the head. And as you exhale, just visualize the breath moving from the crown of your head down, all the way down the spine to the tailbone. Breathing in, drawing the breath up the spine, feeling inside your body. Breathing out, visualizing it moving down the spine. Take the breath a little bit deeper, but keep visualizing the spine inside your body. So deeply breathe in, lifting up through the spine. Breathe out, relaxing as it moves down the spine. We'll do 10 more of those breaths on your own. Inhale, breathing, feeling the breath up the spine, out the crown of the head. Exhaling down from the crown of the head, all the way through the spine and out the tailbone. If your mind wanders, it's okay. Just when you notice it, please bring it back inside you. Practice relaxing and breathing up and down the spine, beginning now. 10 breaths. Keep focusing on the spine. 4 more. Last one. Inhale, drawing it from the tailbone all the way up the spine. As you exhale, release it all the way down. Before you open your eyes, let your shoulders relax again. Let your hips relax again. Imagine the soles of your feet softening to relax. Stay in a soft heart space, feeling the softness in the center of your chest. And then let your eyes open. And I'll turn it back over to Jean, and we would love to have some questions if you guys have any.
Thank you so much. Very powerful and so gentle and permission giving. I think that one of the most important things to tie it together with working with young women with breast cancer is that particularly regardless of stage, when people are finished with treatment or in treatment still, but their hair is there, they look fine. They look fine to everyone else. but they're not fine. And it's very isolating for them. Young women are feeling isolated anyway because they have breast cancer, and it's an old person's disease, so to speak, which really is a false statement, but that's what they keep hearing. So thinking about things like the unconscious belief systems, I wrote that down. I was taking some notes, and I know that unconscious belief systems can touch all kinds of parts of us, but particularly when it comes to illness and having difficult conversations, could we get a little bit more specific about how to engage, whether it's with a friend or with a spouse or with a parent, because many of our population are young adults, about how to have an end-of-life discussion when it's not necessarily meant to be scary. You know, it's meant to be thoughtful and intentional, and making sure that wishes are cared for in a way that they really want. That was a long question, sorry, but I felt like it might be good to add some context.
I appreciate it, Jean. I'm going to start answering this, and then I'll turn it over to Angel. What those that are listening watched just got is looking below the hood of Death Over Dinner, a kind of master class in the thinking behind a very simple and elegant website and toolkit. And so the reason why we designed Death Over Dinner and the way that we designed it and all of the thinking behind it is so that people do have access to this conversation and have an ability to invite other people into it. So when you, and it's just one such way. There's many other projects in this space. The Conversation Project, Engage with Grace. There's many other tools that people can use. The thing that works well about Death Over Dinner is that when you invite somebody to one of these dinners, they immediately have the ability to opt in or opt out. You're not surprising anybody with the conversation. You're not driving one day and all of a sudden saying, "Hey, Mom, let's talk about death." That we don't recommend. I mean, if that's the way you have to do it, then have the conversation. One of the beauties of Death Over Dinner is you're able to send a very beautiful invitation. You're also able to share with your family, friends, whoever it is you want to bring to the table, that it's been legitimized by culture. You can say, the New York Times has written about it, and NPR has written about it, and these renowned people, like Lance, or I mean, what's the surfer that's Laird Hamilton. Have
one of our advisors.
One of our advisors, and his wife, Gabrielle Reese, Olympic gold medalists, are excited about this this project, and I want to have you come and have this dinner with me. So the fact, if someone says yes, they're already agreeing to go into a place of depth with you. So you have that assurance. And the way, what the website gives you, as you go through the steps that Angel talked about on the website, by selecting who's coming to dinner and what your intention is and what your homework is, those decisions that you make as you're going through the site create the conversational prompts for your dinner. And the conversational prompts seem simple, but they've been considered to the level that Angel was leading us into, the level of thinking, the level of care, is in each one of those questions. So the goal with the questions are to create a safe container for people to think about their own experiences. Because that, as opposed to just letting your parents or your loved ones hear about what you're facing and your relationship to mortality, it allows everybody to talk about their own fears, have their own responses, because we all face it, and no one's an expert.
Right.
So it creates a safety around that, and then it also creates a safe container in the sense that we have an opening ritual and a closing ritual. The opening ritual is deceptively simple. It's to honor someone who's no longer with us, who had a very positive impact on your life, and to raise a glass to that person, whether that's wine or water. Um, and and that immediately brings people to a depth and brings those people into the space. It gives the conversation a level of gravity and vulnerability that's pretty rare among even married couples or friends of groups or family structures. And then there'll be 2 to 3 questions that go more deeply into end-of-life conversations and allow people to really identify what it is they're feeling as they answer the questions. And it closes with, again, a deceptively simple ritual. It's called an appreciation in the round. It looks like asking that someone at the table start by acknowledging a person on their left or right, something they admire about the person, essentially the genius that they see in the person. And as soon as someone does that, it starts a circle that goes around the table with everyone acknowledging the person next to them until everyone has been acknowledged once. And you don't let it circle back on itself. And a couple things happen during that. One, people that have a hard time being appreciated get to stop and be appreciated, and they can't interrupt. And people have a hard time appreciating someone else, get an opportunity to do it.
Practice.
A little practice. But what it does is it closes the energy. So there might be tears, there might be laughter, there might be some really hard topics. But with that simple gesture and ritual, the table is complete. And you can go on, you can go deeper into the conversation, but there's a natural point of stopping. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to say on this.
And we've done these dinners with people who were very close to us, and also people who, many people at the table, it was the first time they met each other was that night at the dinner. And regardless of the group and the group dynamic and how long people have known each other, this appreciation in the round after a dinner, people always have something to say to appreciate the person next to them. Is so beautiful and powerful.
I feel like we have gotten a question from a survivor, and I feel like you in part have already answered it. I'm just going to read it word for word. How do you handle an essential invitee if they will attend but not engage? I am not at the end and doing well right now, but I am a prepper. So I want to talk about this, and I've tried.
So you may have a different answer. My opinion is that to allow them to be exactly where they are, and to not try to force them to engage in any way, but to also know that by them coming and experiencing you or whoever else, if there are others at the table, sharing from a vulnerable place and from just an open heart, they're going to be affected in an impactful way. And so I don't assume to know why people don't engage, but I can guess that a lot of times it's fear in one way or another, and fear always comes from a wound that happened a long time ago. And so it's challenging sometimes, especially when it's somebody close to us, and we want to be like, tell me what what are you experiencing? What do you think about what I'm experiencing? But to do our best in allowing them to be where they are, but to not let that impede our open heart at all.
Yeah. I think that it's important to acknowledge that, and I talk with survivors about this, that people have different gifts. And there are people who have no problem going with you to a doctor's appointment. But there are people who just can't do it. That just is too much. But they can take your dog walk, and they can mow your lawn. And so when people, ask, how can I help, take them seriously and give them a job. This is, I think about just in my own growing up around the dinner table after dinner was always my favorite time, even as a child, because everyone was a lot more relaxed and started talking about things that they didn't necessarily talk about. So I would offer to that one survivor, maybe that's when someone who is willing to show up but maybe shy about what they are afraid to say, they might by the end, particularly when you're talking about that circle of closure, that closing ritual, they may be more willing at that point. So I wouldn't discourage not inviting them to be there. They may just show up differently. Some of the other questions that we have are, how have you all been able to lead so many death dinners in such a short time?
Well, that's simple. Yeah, I think probably referring to the fact that there's been over 100,000 dinners in 2 years, and that would mean that we would be doing about 10 a night or something like that. So the beauty of Death Over Dinner is that it functions better without us. We designed it as an internet platform, as a web platform, because we wanted it to scale without us having to be there. And so the majority, 99.999% of the dinners happen without us attending or facilitating. And I had this question, we're in San Diego right now presenting at a conference, and I had a question about, well, how are the dinners impactful without a strong facilitator? And I said to the person, I said, well, you're probably a strong facilitator, right? He said, yeah, exactly. Well, maybe you should trust that things can happen without this facilitation. Because I think that I see both the gift that we have to facilitate when we go to dinners and the fact that we're a bit of a crutch.
That's funny.
People tend to, when we're hosting, they tend to look to us to hold the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think that they're more impactful when somebody takes that ownership. And the tools are all there for someone to have a dinner without us present or without a strong facilitator present. All of these answers are within us, and we just need to have them be unlocked by really well-crafted questions.
And Death Over Dinner creates that container. It creates a perfect, I don't know about perfect, I don't like the word perfect, but it creates an effective container where you just follow the model. And like Michael said, there's been a lot of heart that has gone in and thought that's gone into the questions, and to trust the process.
We have a comment from the person who asked that last question, and then I have another question from a survivor. The survivor who posted the first question said that the essential person who won't engage is her husband.
Mm-hmm.
Have y'all run into that, like the closest person to someone?
Yeah.
You're nodding your head a lot, Angel, so I guess for this survivor that's not unusual. I don't, ask him on a date, give him a questionnaire to fill out, something creative to get it started. And, if he likes to eat, plan the dinner.
Yeah.
Right? I mean.
Yeah. And you may, speaking to the woman who asked the question and shared the comment, you may have already done this. But I think it really helps to share how the silence makes you feel without any energy of guilting him or shaming him or any of that, just from getting in a really pure open heart space about how alone it feels.
Mm-hmm. That's great. The next question, and it's a two-part. Where do you feel children fit in the scenario of Death Over Dinner, and what about in the normal course of a young mother's life as she might be facing a terminal diagnosis?
I can speak to the children's side, and I'll let Angel take the second part of the question. I have two daughters, one is 15 and one is 7. And they both are very interested in the conversation about death. I don't, and I'm not going to make this suggestion as a professional. I can't make this suggestion with a doctoral degree in psychiatry. But from what I've seen, keeping children from this conversation is doing no one any favors. I think it's a different conversation. I think that people naturally give somewhat different answers to these questions, but the questions are appropriate at any age. And I think if a young person doesn't feel moved to answer or feels like they want to be excused from the table, that should be respected. But if they show a natural interest, then that's the way that I would gauge it. They were thinking about having this dinner to talk about, the fact that the people died. Are you interested? Yeah.
And then it's normal.
And it's normal.
Will you just refresh my memory on the second part?
Yeah. What about in the normal course of a young mom's life as she might be facing a terminal diagnosis?
What about in the
children? I guess about having this conversation about death when they have a young mother who she may not be facing a terminal illness right now, but that's something that I'm not a survivor, but I've been working with them for 11 years, so I hope they won't think I'm misrepresenting this. But that hovers, that fear of things changing or that they could be facing something terminal later on. They face their mortality when they're diagnosed to begin with in a way that it's not time for them to face their mortality. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think she's asking about, maybe the death over dinner conversation is one that evolves over time because her children could have been a certain age when she was diagnosed, and as she gets older, they're going to get older too. And Michael, as a parent, you probably could speak to this, that the questions might change.
The first thing that comes up for me, if I understand that question correctly, the first response that comes up for me is, and like Michael said, I'm not speaking as an expert. I do not have the doctorate in psychiatry or anything else. My own trauma and healing, and so that's where this answer comes from. And the first thing that came up for me is that when I was growing up, my mother didn't have cancer or any other illness, but there were secrets kept in my family, and a pretty big secret that was kept in my family in my early childhood that that really, I found later, really shaped me in a way that did not contribute to my wholeness, because children can sense things, and they may not have, our brain hasn't developed enough to articulate their sensing it, but they can sense when things are being kept. And what happened for me when I could sense that there was something that I didn't know, I didn't feel safe, and so I didn't really trust my home or my safety, and at a very deep level. And so I think that as much support and gentle conversation as possible to acknowledge what's going on as it goes along is the best.
Yeah, and it's courageous, and
Extremely.
Very courageous and in a way revolutionary, because generationally speaking, my parents didn't talk about anything. So, and maybe it's different now, but I'm hoping that the survivor who asked that question, if we're not getting at the question, to please help us know. We've had another question about whether or not you've heard of everplans.com and if you recommend that as a good resource.
Yeah, Everplans is one of our partners.
Okay.
For those people that have survived a death dinner, they get to step 5. And step 5, there's a few partners there. One is the Conversation Project. One is Everplans. So if you're motivated to move directly from a death dinner to your advanced care directives, to creating a living will, Everplans is an exceptional place to do that. You can do it online, and it's secure and safe. Another is Gist.com, G-Y-S-T, and they are an extraordinary resource for this. And we're starting to work with Organize.org as well for organ donorship, so that can be another final step after you've had a dinner. Mm-hmm. So.
Do you find, and we're about to wrap up, but do you find that in the template of the Death Over Dinner model that it's not only the wishes about their wills and their burial, but like, do people get into details about their service?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
You know, I think what people want to know, like, what are you up to with that? You know, what are you trying to accomplish with Death Over Dinner? And it's because we're not funded by a large insurance company or a medical group, and because we've stayed fiercely independent and don't have to answer to anyone.
And operate without a budget.
Yeah, Death Over Dinner operates with an annual $0 budget intentionally, because we wanted it to be a gift. And I know we're running out of time, but what we're trying to accomplish, the metric that we're most interested in is what I would call death literacy. The fact that this culture knows how to have conversations of this level of gravity, that have some facility in it, because you will face it. And the more, even just, we called it Let's Have Dinner and Talk About Death, and Death Over Dinner, because so people would say, question mark, you know, WTF, what is that? And that, in and of itself, even on the scale of reading about it in the newspaper or coming across the website, it already, you know, has the potential to improve death literacy in our culture. And we think a lot of things are possible once we're able to start having these conversations.
Thank you both so much. I am so honored to have spent this hour with you, and I know that we had a good following on the event tonight. I've been told that, so I'm thrilled about that too. And everyone, please know that this will be, it has been recorded and will be on our YouTube channel later. And we wish you all a good night, and thank you so much again.
Thank you, Jean.
Thank you, Jean.
And thank you to everybody who's watching.
Yeah.
Good night.
So for everyone who watched tonight, you will see on this slide a survey that is available particularly to the study participants, but we welcome anyone who would like to complete it. You will also see my name, Jean Rao, and my email address on this slide. If you have any questions or concerns, you weren't able to watch the whole thing, you can't get to the survey, please do not hesitate to reach out. We're happy to help you in any way we can. And thank you again so much for joining us and being a robust conversation for our two speakers.